live today with Food is Health.
That's good.
And we are going to have a special guest joining us. So last week, the House voted 280 to 142 to strip a pesticide liability provision. And says I'm not good at this. Okay.
Anyways, is the famous Kelly.
Hi.
There's Kelly. I was just
Hey,
teeing
guys.
you up. Hi. Yay.
I made it. I'm at my sister's house, so there's a little frantic connection in.
Well, we're glad you're here. So I was just teeing you up. So 73 Republicans broke from leadership, and that's not just a MAHA moment. That's a population renegotiating a 60-year-old contract on how society handles the externalities of innovation. Contract was built for a world where you couldn't measure the harm, but we can measure it now. And Kelly, you've brought that to light. And so now what happens to the architecture when the invisibility is gone? And Carter wrote an outstanding piece this morning.
Outstanding. Wow.
Outstanding. And I think you're gonna see us writing more and really diving deeper into this externality issue, because that's truly what we're dealing with, is that the externalities of cheap calories has granted us chronic disease. So those cheap calories are not cheap. And so pesticides in our food is creating also chronic disease and trillions of dollars of cost. So that is not an inexpensive way to handle crops. And yet that's how this has been handled now since Carter, did you say the 40s, the 60s? I mean, basically,
well, I think
60 years.
So to set this up a little bit even more, companies build things. Everything that's built has positive and negative externalities, and it's important that companies are accountable for those negative externalities, the things that might go wrong. There are things that, when we think about we were boosting yield at some level, it'd be interesting to know where it really came in, that the liability protections came in. But at times, we create liability limitations where the government says, look, we will investigate this, we'll test it, and to a degree to make it so that commerce can go forward, we approve a drug even though it has negative outcomes, and we tell people it has negative outcomes. So we've set up these regimes and in regulation that sort of tolerate the fact that not everything's perfect. When we roll back the clock on something like Roundup, our perspective about the potential harms have changed. And honestly, the real ask is oddly, was to put a warning. If you really think about this, it was to put a warning on it. And there was resistance. And so just putting a warning on something was causing a lot of resistance. And I think that I interpret that people, the voters, we want to know when something might be bad for us. So can you please, if you put a warning label on a drug, let's make sure that the understanding of the warnings are on everything else. And I think in this particular case, the regulators and industry maybe got it wrong. And Kelly, what you've been able to pull off here, and the others are like, let's hold people accountable for it and change the way that we're regulated.
Yeah, to back up even a little bit on that, I think that there's this misnomer, and we're really seeing right now the fallout from the 1980s approach to regulation that really came under the Reagan administration, in contradiction to what happened with even the founding of the EPA. And this the establishment of the OMB, which is the office that houses underneath, it's in the executive branch, and it was established to decide, okay, if you're going to do a regulation, then what are the ramifications? Like, is it worth it to have this externality, if it gives this much of a boost in profitability, and weigh it against human health. And so that was established as really, I mean, it sounds like, oh, that's an interesting idea, but in reality, it was a way for corporations to continue to push their agenda of deregulation in sort of a black box. There's an office called OIRA there. It's a black box of regulation. You don't really know exactly who it is that, puts their thumb on the scale, but you can see when some things that are really ill-advised come out of that office, you can get a sense as to who's really making the decisions there. And so when you launch into a whole and the Republicans grab so tightly to this deregulatory narrative, and it's a thing that they just keep on committing to. And now we're at this point of seeing, okay, well, now what, we're 40 years later, let's take a look and see how things are. Well, they're really bad. We have polluted water, we have polluted food, we've polluted air. We are incredibly sick. We are infertile. We have an autoimmune crisis. We have cancer everywhere. And I just don't know how much longer you can keep a narrative going that deregulation is the path forward. And it just we just have to get post that and be thinking about how we can be innovative and still have corporations but have them take care of their externalities, right? So we're not all impacted.
Yeah, and the technology is advanced. I mean, one of the other points we make in the article is that we can assess a great deal more with a fraction of the effort. So if someone were to sit down in 1965 and say, understand the full negative externalities of this chemical, it was a lot harder to do it then than it is now. I mean, we can in silico do it. We can look at more animal models. So there's just a lot more that we can do today. And so I think it makes a lot of sense for, you think you've got two corporations. One corporation that really considers that cost and thinks it's important to say, I have a product, I want to make it safe, I want to do something important, and I'm going to invest the energy to do that testing. And B, who says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to skirt myself around this issue. I think that I interpret what's going on now is people in America are saying we want A, not B. Like if you can make the investment, and if it's going to cost more for the product, we're willing to pay more for the product. There's more visibility to that. The idea that everything has to be the lowest cost, it's like, what's the right value? I think that my impression is that we're moving to a point where consumers are much more willing to consider those factors, which happens as society advances and GDP increases and you're not worried about starving, you're not worried about famine, and now you're worried about, you can have the luxury of worrying about health. That's what happens is people, anyway. So I think it's an interesting shift in how we invest and how we think about our responsibility as companies.
And let's even think about, one of the premises of this liability shield that they were trying to shove through the Farm Bill is it's boiled down to a bare glyphosate issue, but in reality, it's 57,000 different pesticide products that you would no longer be able to sue if you got sick from. 57,000 products. A vast majority of those are manufactured in, by ChemChina and by foreign chemical corporations. And we, as Americans, there are people that represent us that are more than willing to hand over our rights to sue ChemChina. I mean, it's like, how much more ridiculous can things get? We already know that they're selling us and we are using pesticides here on our food supply that is in our water that they banned in China because they're so toxic. And so we are worried if there's ever been a question of national security, I'm always pointing well, they don't have to do anything to us because we're slowly killing ourselves. And you can see it in the healthcare cost. I mean, we're doing it to ourselves. It's the most crazy making thing. It's not even like you can say we're protecting Monsanto, which is an American company, any longer. They're not. No. They were bought by Bayer. They're German. You can't even make that defense, right? So it's a very strange point in time that we even have to be rallying around something that is so almost comically horrible and have to think of this as something we really need to be spending a lot of time on because our Congress people are that crooked to do that. So it's mind blowing.
So I want to step back a little bit because we have a mixed audience here. And even though you're like one of my besties. I somehow did not know your story until Saturday when you were, or Friday when you were on the stage with Ryland and you told your story about how he sort of came to this point of being the champion of saying it's not okay to have these chemicals in our food, with your own health. And would you mind sharing a little bit of that, or is that is that
Yeah,
like
no,
off? Okay.
that's fine. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's good to share because I just know so many, particularly my girlfriends that are
I
having
told you I had the same. I mean, I had the same issue.
it's the same
From
thing.
Roundup. So
The,
like,
yeah. This is the thing, and people don't know it, and the corporations go to huge extents to make sure you don't know it. And uh, I'll just say the long story short, I had a really mysterious illness that was entirely incapacitating. I had rashes and stomach problems, neuropathy, um, really headaches, sinus issues, hormonal issues. I mean, it was really my system going defunct. And after seeing really every specialist I could think of at Stanford and UCSF, I was left with the diagnosis I must be crazy and layered on medications to treat this, treat the rashes apparently. And then it eventually I realized actually I went to go see a psychiatrist because I thought, well, maybe, at this point I've exhausted everything else. The psychiatrist has intake blood work. That intake blood work, by the way, the first round of the blood work was at Theranos. The Theranos place in downtown Palo Alto. Anyway, fortunately, I had the wherewithal to go and test it a second time, and it confirmed that I was entirely nutrient deficient. I mean, I had zero vitamin D. I had zero vitamin C. I had negligible B1. I had a B12 of 50. It should be 500. I mean, I was a starving person and no one had thought to check it. And it really came down to full gut dysbiosis. My gut was such a wreck that I couldn't absorb any of the nutrients that I needed to have my body function. And so later on, I learned I went gluten-free, started feeling better, went to a conference at Columbia, and I said, well, I don't know what's behind this gluten sensitivity epidemic, but it must be something. And I asked the scientists there, has anyone looked on the farm to see if anything's happening in connection with farming grains? And no one had any answers. And then someone from General Mills found me afterwards and said, oh yeah, well, a lot of the farmers are spraying Roundup on the grain right before harvest as a harvest tool. And then it goes into our food supply. So light bulbs are going off in my head. I talked to all these scientists who are doing deep dives on the impact of glyphosate on the gut microbiome. Well, lo and behold, it acts like an antibiotic that selects for beneficial gut bacteria, not the E. coli. It's the stuff that we are buying in probiotic bottles at Whole Foods. It's that stuff that we don't have anymore. Well, we're eating this every single meal that we eat. Low dose of an antibiotic that selects for beneficial gut bacteria. This is crazy time. So that really sent me on this whole, and then actually I went to my business school reunion, and of course there are all these incredible innovators who I love that are thinking about these solutions to chronic disease and, ever evolving there, and it's wonderful. And I'm looking and I'm just like, but we're spraying an antibiotic on our food. So maybe we should start there and start addressing it from the root cause. That seems like that's a problem. Of course, it doesn't make money to do that, but clearly that's one of the contributors to our chronic disease epidemic.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I shared with you on Saturday, I had not the same, but a similar, I mean, I actually want to add one other item to this. So before the health issue that I had, I sort of got into all of this back in, I want to say like probably 10, 11 plus years ago. And one of the first forays into it was I listened to a podcast. I listened to Zach Bush on Rich Roll. And I left that podcast episode devastated because I was like, the world is ending because of glyphosate, and our gut lining is completely ruined. Everything's over. I was just like, and I'm working over here in healthcare, I'm like, this is just like some sort of dystopian universe. I somehow managed to keep on keeping on. I don't know. but there's this sort of feeling of hope. Like, you've given me immense hope, because Zach has gone on to do additional episodes and a lot of additional things, basically saying like, it's over, it's game over, we've gone too far. And I think once I met Carter, it gave me hope, where I was like, no, actually, we can regenerate our soil. Like, we can get out of this mess. We can actually do it. And I think all of us before last week thought it was sort of not game over, but we definitely were. It was a no for a while, and your work changed that. And I just, I want to say thank you. I had a pretty profound Sunday, like flying home. I was kind of letting all of it settle in last week, in Nashville, and then in Texas, where you were, where RFK came at Ryland's. And I just had this immense sense of hope and gratitude. I haven't had a chance to write about it yet, but I just felt like, maybe there is hope here, that it's not people, to Carter's point, to where we were before. Like, I'll get back to my health thing another time later on in the episode. But, this feeling of like, maybe consumers do matter. Maybe our voices do have now, with all the different tools like social media and just all the things the platforms that we have to speak up. You don't necessarily have to have a huge lobby that is supporting industry, that consumers are fed up with being sick. They know something's wrong, and they know that it's not just what they're doing on a daily basis, that it is the foods that they're getting, and they're frustrated with it. And, I think it's remarkable that, you started this back in 2017, right?
Yeah. Yeah. When no one was really talking about it. And there were a few people that forever have been organic people that have understood this connection, but it certainly wasn't mainstreamed. And it was so interesting. It was really going to need to be something very large to push this mainstream. And you mentioned Zach Bush. That was definitely like a notch. That Ritual podcast that he did brought glyphosate up many levels into visibility. It was so wonderful. And then, and then over COVID, in 2000, we had a webinar that was groundbreaking. Cory Booker joined us. We had Zach, and we were talking about this, but still so incredibly niche. And it really hasn't been since, frankly, Bobby Kennedy, who was an attorney, I met him in the courtroom when he was suing Monsanto over glyphosate, bringing this to the national stage. And the upside is, to the really horrible, and for those who don't know, President Trump signed an executive order basically calling glyphosate a national security priority, and starting to manufacture more of it in the United States, which in some ways I don't totally disagree, because as I said, we're fully dependent on foreign companies right now for our chemicals, and unfortunately our system is dependent on glyphosate. So as aggravating as that is, I understand it. But the fact that Trump did something like that brought it to this whole new level of awareness, where you have mainstream media that, I would beg and cry and write all kinds of op-eds and send them for years and years. Like, you have to talk about glyphosate, and no one ever would. And Bayer was publishing these full page ads in mainstream media saying that, anti-science people say glyphosate's dangerous. And all of a sudden you have the New York Times, Washington Post, Bloomberg, all of these mainstream, NPR talking about the concerns around pesticides. And I'm like, okay, so is this the path? So while we're having these frustrations, where I wish, frankly, that the administration would listen to Kennedy, and we could immediately go to regenerative agriculture and be tapering off of these toxic chemicals, and get Lee Zeldin in line over at the EPA, where he doesn't seem to be very, very willing to come along. But does it matter as much if now we have this huge national and global awakening around the concerns of pesticides just over the last few months? This is a dream come true. So while I have been feeling very frustrated, actually, for the last year within the MAHA movement that more hasn't happened, it's like, okay, so these are the incremental stepping stones, because I refuse to go down the route of we're just screwed and this is just the way it is and we're doomed and that's all, because we just can't. We can't do that, because we just have too much to live for. No,
I can't get up in the morning when that happens. So I was like, well, that's not an option for me. So I'm just gonna have to believe that there's something else out there than the planet falling apart, because then I don't know. I'll eat a bunch of ice cream and not care about my metabolic health anymore. So,
That's true.
as companies think about this, sometimes, like when we've been talking about getting rid of chronic disease, there's an assumption that consumers are apathetic. They're apathetic about sugar, they're apathetic about health claims, they're apathetic about Roundup. Are What have you learned about what activates people, or like what what do you think consumers are thinking here, or why are they holding back, or what are they not doing that they should be doing to sort of stand up and cause a shift, whether that's a health shift or a toxin shift? What have you learned?
I have really learned that we are only going to be growing in numbers simply because every single day that someone realizes they have a root cause illness and their biome is messed up and their autoimmunity maybe can be alleviated or at least helped somewhat, if not cured. If their kid has a really severe issue with ADHD and then they change the diet, take him like I did with my own son, took him off of gluten and artificial dyes, lo and behold, he can focus in class. It's those experiences and and I think that corporation or companies, smaller companies have picked onto this trend where in 2017, when I started this functional medicine, I mean, I went to the Institute of Functional Medicine conference and it was like a few of us just kind of huddled in a corner, like root cause, gut health and, and looking for any kind
Where
of
were you
information.
back then? Like, how did we not meet until now? Like,
I
that
don't
should have been our
understand.
heyday together.
I mean, we
Carter's
should
like,
have been.
no, because the two of us together are trouble. So I guess that's why it's good. It took until now.
I know. We should have been at that conference together saying, that's right, root cause, root cause.
Could you imagine? It would have been so fun. Like, we would have had so much fun the last 9 years together.
It totally would have been so great. That is really missed time. That is terrible.
It is.
So, but I was just thinking, like, so when I needed to rebuild my body in 2017 or 2016, really, with vitamins. Okay, so I went online, I'm Googling, I'm like, oh, how do I rebuild vitamins? Because each time I start one, there's a problem because I need a cofactor that I didn't realize I needed. And so then I have side effects and it's this whole thing. And so I would look, and I ended up having to go to PubMed and literally call scientists. I remember calling one at Davis and one at UCLA saying, if I add that much thiamine, what else do I need? And they're like, well, we don't really know. And so just the opportunity for consumers now to go get their own information is the game changer, because that is completely different today. Like you can go and cure yourself online more or less if you have one of these functional based diseases. And so people are doing that. That's what's amazing. People are doing that. And that is why this movement I finally have hope for, just by virtue of not only social media, which I think is a big part of it, but certainly not everything on there is accurate, but raising the national consciousness around this. Now, this argument, I mean, I'm really hopeful that the Democrats and Republicans are going to be fighting on this narrative, because each time they do that, it's raising the consciousness and more people are learning about it. More people want to get off the drugs, and I'm seeing it everywhere. And so I think that this is a thing that, I mean, when I was feeling extra depressed, probably in 2018, realizing that how far we had to go. But I never stopped thinking that we humans in general tend to out innovate, right? Whatever the situation is, and are very crafty. And I think we're at the tipping point now where people realize, oh, wow, we really do need to out innovate this. And I think that that's where, like you're talking about, that's why it's always so great to go to a ranch and learn about regenerative agriculture, because it's exactly what we're talking about, of restoring it from root cause, literally. And so I know obviously you guys are very involved in that world and trying to understand how you can make it work from a financial perspective, particularly as an investor, because it's not easy and it's very, very early days in it. And so I feel like that's really where the health is going to come from. As soon as you're getting more nutrient dense food and those practices change and the farmers are incentivized to make that change, and then all of a sudden that strawberry tastes like a strawberry and the meat tastes like meat, and then I think we're a go, and we're close to it. I mean, what do you guys think?
Carter?
I think close to it. We spent 350,000 years and evolution had this under control. We spent 100 years boosting
Messing
yield,
with it.
boosting yield to deal with famine. And I think we've got some effort ahead of us. I think in terms of close to it, it's a hell of a lot easier to evaluate in a computer whether these things have negative effects. and it's a hell of a lot easier to start to do the tests. I think that NIH, for example, really has just announced a trial to study 6,000 patients and understand their gut microbiome and how it affects their proteomics in their body. So that is your gut microbiome and how does it affect really the genetics in your body over time. And so that's work that hadn't really been done. And the gut microbiome is a big thing. So I think we've got a lot of exciting things immediately on the horizon. And we can do a lot right now. So right now we can get to whole food and we can take the steps that you're talking about, like make it so you don't need chemicals. Like,
so
we can
let's
evaluate chemicals, or we can make it so you don't need chemicals.
Yeah.
And if you improve soil health, you don't need chemicals. Weeds don't grow if soil health is better. And so if we sort of pay attention a little bit to how evolution worked and what it did, I think that near term we can have a huge effect in terms of getting us off of chronic disease. And then long term, when we're thinking about how to get scale, we can get better at figuring out how biologics, for example, can replace small molecules. So I think it's an exciting moment. I do get a little confused as to whether incumbents are sort of stuck in the wrong model, like they're back in system B, thinking, not listening to consumers. I get disappointed that a lot of people that I know and respect in conventional ag, I sort of look at this as we're going to starve. I think there's a challenge that farmers are going to have figuring this out. I don't think we're going to starve. And I think that if conventional farmers and regenerative farmers sit down and put their heads together, we'll get on the other side of this. But
that's the big question.
I think it's, you gotta, I mean, what were the questions for the people that flipped? I mean, did you get any insight as you're walking around the Hill, talking to legislature, talking to staff? What kind of insights did you pick up as to their motivations for why they were changing their perspective on this?
In most of the cases that the people flipped, they had a personal reason, and they already understood. A lot of them were very well aware of what the tenets of MAHA were. A lot of them had read Good Energy. They oftentimes, at least with some of the staffers, they might have celiac themselves, or they're trying to get pregnant and they can't. So there's a lot of personal experience that's making them pay attention for the first time that hasn't historically been true. And I think that is enough. But of course, we were up against Bayer being in there every single day talking about how all this is crazy and anti-science. And so our ability to overcome that narrative that has dominated, for decades shows that they are taking it to heart. And I don't think it's just for political reasons. I think it's because they are having their own health problems, which once again, ultimately, I think that's what's going to move the needle for these people.
Well, so where do you think that goes next? I mean, does it turn into some of those people saying, okay, we need new legislation, or we need FDA and EPA to change their game? I mean, they've captured to some degree. Like, are they going to say, EPA and we could say to FDA and EPA, like, you need to up your game. You need to change the tools that you have for sequencing stuff or testing stuff, and you need to actually help industry do better here. And sort of take that kind of, or is there any kind of motivation to shift in that direction, or is it?
I think it's still early days, because I think that those Republicans are trying to feel out what this world looks like. And I think that they're putting their toe into it and seeing what kind of pushback they get is my feeling. And historically, with all these bills that have been very pro-health, very rarely did a Republican ever join that bill. But I can imagine things now if you have the likes of Rep. Luna, that Anna Paulina Luna, who's in there as a champion of all of this, and it's not just her. There are several, particularly out of Florida, that are committed to this health narrative. And so can they start putting together some legislation that really would move things for the first time coming out of the Republican Party? I absolutely think so. And I also think that, since my foray into MAHA, I've met a lot of Republican constituents who are very ready for this, because the truth of the matter is that this farmland, the rural communities, a lot of them are red states. And a lot of them have had firsthand experience of getting the raw end of the deal with the water, the well water that's contaminated with agricultural chemicals and fertilizer, the air spray, the ridiculous levels of cancer. I mean, I lost my father-in-law within 3 months. I lost my mother-in-law and father-in-law in their early 70s in rural North Carolina, where everyone in that town seems to get cancer or something, or a brain tumor or something. They all are on well water. It's former tobacco lands. And my father-in-law died of ALS, which Duke said that was from pesticide exposure, and then my mother-in-law from cancer. And what's so sad is these very red rural communities are considering this is normal now. So this is normal. We don't have access even really to clean food, and our well water may not be great, but it's our well water, and it's on my farm, and so that's what we drink, and that's just how it is. And it's this commitment to, this is just how it is. We're going to accept it. We're going to go to church and pray, for our health, and it's just not fair. It's absolutely not fair, and those constituents that are voting in these congresspeople, the congresspeople need to be listening to that, because you have someone that's in North Carolina that's behind the pork industry that's polluting like no one's business, all these toxicants into the waterways. And as soon as those constituents, which they are, start connecting their chronic disease with this issue, then the Congress people are going to have to respond. And that's where I love the fact that someone like Alex Clark from Turning Point is waking up all of these young conservatives saying, what the heck, why are we getting this raw end? And why are we so exposed to this? I'm sick. Like that's not fair. And I really see that as the hot area right now in the development of the movement. And for a long time, I was wishing, after seeing what happened with my family in North Carolina, wishing that Republicans could come to the table so we could finally just be done with it. And so while that vote last week was certainly not overwhelming from Republicans, a lot of them voted against the amendment that they shouldn't have voted against, it still shows a trend that we need in order to finally be past the chemical era. And so that's what's making me excited, even though, then this week there's lots of murmuring and newspaper articles like MAHA's fake, or MAHA's just an internet sensation. MAHA is a paper tiger. Like, there are all these things. I'm like, that's interesting. You guys feel like you need to say that, because if it were really a paper tiger, would you come out in national media saying that? I don't think so. So that's what's happening there.
Well, so
the games we play.
If this stumbles now, why will it stumble?
If it stumbles now, it's because the swamp ate all of us alive. And they are everywhere. I mean, they are all around the USDA. I mean, USDA is run by the Soybean Association and corn growers and Farm Bureau. The EPA, while I don't think Lee Zeldin is a particularly bad guy, he has Kyle Kunkel and Nancy Beck, who are the cheerleaders for industry and lobbyists that are running our chemical department and our pesticide department. So when you have, and actually the head of agriculture over at the EPA, who they hooked me up with to work with, and I look at his resume, and he came straight over from Corteva. So I'm just not expecting much out of them. And I feel the sharks are circling a lot and particularly with Casey Means not getting put into the Surgeon General position, I think is really indicative of how ferocious the battle is. So if this does not ultimately succeed, it is because the corporations won, as they always seem to do. And so that's why, how much more can we get in the public consciousness where we demand better next time around is where my mind is, because there have been obviously several frustrations.
So
go ahead.
So this takes me a little bit to kind of the system design thinking that we talk about all the time of A, B, and C, and A being evolution, inherent health, but it's not scalable, not necessarily scalable and affordable in today's world, and system B being what we created, which is cheap calories, solving for famine, focusing on that, focusing on yield, and at the same time creating a chronic disease epidemic upon which a healthcare system was developed that monetizes disease and does not profit from healing it. And so now the notion that Carter and I have really put forth around System C, which is really, to me, rooted on outcomes, on human outcomes. And I think this really speaks to that. So kind of back to your point just now of like, this is the new era, we have to move forward. The more that consumers, Carter, you were talking about testing, and the more that consumers can directly correlate X does Y, cause and effect, that then can be priced in an externality, then that changes the game entirely. And there's so many, even outside of tests, there's even just information that's so much more accessible now of, if I put this in my system, likely this is going to happen. And I just feel like you can't hide from that anymore. Like it used to be this, even 10 years ago, like you were saying, back whenever Zach Bush was like a name hardly any people knew. Not that he necessarily has a huge name now, but the work around glyphosate, that the fact that it was causing all sorts of problems, we didn't have any of those tools back then. And now, even in the last 6 months, with what AI can do, I mean, let's talk a little bit about insight into knowing what toxins do to your body, what chemicals do to your body. I mean, when we were in Nashville last week, Dr. Joe Pizzorno was there. Kind of I would call him one of the top scientists in the world around toxins and the impact on your body. And he was very skeptical on AI. He was sitting next to me at dinner, and he was sort of, and anybody that knows me knows I've gone deep, and you'll be seeing a piece tomorrow morning that kind of goes down that path, but on a personal level. And so I was talking about it. He's like, well, now you've sort of like changed me a little bit. Like you've gotten me warmed up that maybe chat is the problem and maybe Claude is not, or, whatever. And he's like, but let's test it. And so we sat at dinner and we started testing it, and he threw what he thought was a pretty tricky question at it. And the answer, it was all around toxins, and it was about diabetogens and basically your body's response to chemicals, right? Like what happens at a cellular level and the reactivity that happens, et cetera. I won't get into the scientific terms. And he was like, you know what? That was actually pretty right. And so when you've got the leading scientists saying like, yep, that was pretty much the right answer. I mean, people are adopting that at just exponential rates. And it's to me, it's like, how can you continue to be okay putting what we know to be problematic in food? I mean, it's the same battle that I'm seeing on the healthcare end. Is like the number of clinicians that are still doubling down on the notion that food is medicine still needs to be researched. It's like, really?
Is that right?
Yeah. Like, well, we don't know if it clinically will reverse. We really don't know if it will reverse the disease. We don't want to take that risk. So we're just going to keep them on insulin. But I think that's the key is the System C design around outcomes. And if anything we can do to accelerate transparency and awareness for consumers of what's happening, like, soil.
The other thing to add here is that we may be over the tipping point. Like once it costs you only $80 to run a blood test, or once you can sit down with an AI tool for $20 and be able to sit at dinner with Joe Pizzorno and basically have parity in the conversation, you now have a whole bunch more people equipped to sort of get the agency that, Kelly, you had to fight 10 years or how long? I mean, 16 years to your storyline today can be maybe evaluated and worked through by someone casually in 6 months.
Oh, yeah. Entirely. I mean, it's a completely different. If you're going to get sick, now is the better time to get sick than it was 10 years ago.
I
That's
mean,
for
10
sure.
years ago, you would have probably done a function health
Yeah,
test,
I would have known
and
immediately. Like it would have been right back
it
in
would have
me.
it would have yelled at you and said your B12. It would have a whole bunch of
I had,
things.
I mean, I had, so now I get to, like, I had that happen to me. Um, I got super sick. I thought I had MS. I ended up in the ER. At one point thought was having a stroke. The ER doctor told me I was having a panic attack and sent me home. I was humiliated because I'm like, a panic attack? My autonomic system, my nervous system was just like, it was horrific. And literally went to a neurologist. Like, I made my husband go with me because I thought for certain he was going to tell me I had MS. Like, thought it was a foregone conclusion. And I was like, and I remember growing up, there was a woman in our church community who had MS, and it was just devastating to watch that. And I was like, this is it. This is my fate. And I was horrified. And then it was, okay, well, it's not that. We think you have a tumor on your adrenal gland, right? And so then I had to go through that. It was just this diagnostic rabbit hole from hell that lasted for 7 or 8 months. And to this point, nobody diagnosed me with anything. Nobody ever said, this is what's wrong. But the only thing I could trace back what was going on were two things. One, I was being sued, which I had never been, and I've always been a do-gooder. So the notion of having done something wrong set me into a complete tailspin. It was like, no, I didn't do any, like that whole thing was happening. But then the icing on the cake was we had moved back into a home that was full of off-gassing that we had completely rebuilt. And then the topper, we needed to re-landscape our yard, and we live in Florida. And my husband penetrated our entire lawn, like everything in our yard, every plant, everything with Roundup, like literally high dose. Like he put on a thing. And then I'm working from home with the air handler, right? Pumping that air in, day out, and all of that. And how did I get better? Food. That was it. No supplement. Like I took a bunch of supplements, but at the end of the day, it took a 6-month complete protocol. I followed the Walls MS protocol.
Oh yeah, the Walls, yeah.
And I was like, I'm just, because that was I couldn't focus. I would sit at my computer and I would spend 3 hours doing something that used to take me 15 minutes. It was terrifying. I mean, it was terrifying. And finally I said to my husband, the only thing that seems to make me feel better is when we eat. We were getting Green Chef at the time. And I was like, when we eat this like super clean, whatever, I couldn't even cook. So,
Yeah.
But again, nobody knew what we know. I even bought Zach's thing, like the stuff that you take to try and help your diet. Well, and that was telling. Speak about that. Carter, you know what I'm talking about? It's like this water. It's like, I don't know. It's so, I shouldn't make fun of it. I mean, it
has humic acid in it.
Yeah, but it is meant to heal your gut lining when it's, I mean, whether it's good or bad, but it's meant to do that. And I remember it looks like water, you guys. Like you buy it, and if you've ever used it, like you're supposed to take a teaspoon, and it literally looks like water. And I was like, well, this is like a placebo. Like this is what I think. And I'm like, I eat healthy. I'm fine. And it said, like, if you suspect something's wrong, maybe take a little less. And I was like, I'm fine. So I take like a teaspoon. That's it. A teaspoon. My stomach was destroyed for like a week because that's how messed up my gut was. Like that I needed to take it in much smaller increments that, my from all that Roundup. And then just from years of, like you and I talked, Kelly, and like, we do have the fun genetic lottery of having poor methylation, which just adds to the whole conundrum of this. And there are 25% of the population has that same thing. And so, but again, you don't know that. My guess is within another year or two, Function Health will test for that, and everybody will know that. And those are the fun facts that we didn't know 10 years ago. I'm done with my tirade. You can get back on it.
So, but what would you do differently with your care providers now, Kelly? Like now that you've been through this?
Oh, I don't even think, I mean, aside from, I go back to my GP who said that vitamins don't matter. And I don't know whether there's a place really, except in extreme emergency situations, for going to your typical GP. I mean, I I don't I actually have a concierge doctor who I like quite a bit. So when something, I need something that is very mainstream and understandable, I can get to him, although it's not very often now because usually I'm just figuring stuff out for myself because of the massive gaslighting and horrible experience with doctors. And so at this point, I feel like people's primary care doctor should, and particularly with pediatricians, should be a functional doctor. I'll bring in my two kids too, who had a functional pediatrician. And I mean, when my daughter had digestive problems, we did the whole biome reset and rebuilt her microbiome, and she became like a different person after it. And it seems to me that the kids are really needing this. And I look at them and the behavior issues and all of that, and the answer is always medication. And it's just so sad because how many people can afford to go? It's like such a luxury. How many people can afford to go pay out of pocket to a functional pediatrician, to this rare specialist to bring your kids so they can perform optimally? Like hardly anyone in this country. So if we can get functional medicine to the place where it's more affordable, which I think it's kind of going in that path, but still it's cost prohibitive. So now you have this issue where only wealthy people can have real true health. But to your point, function and other blood tests, and with pairing it with AI and options online, you can get pretty darn far without actually having the hand holding with the functional doctor.
And so what do you think your children's peers are thinking? If we've sort of advanced 20 years to that generation and they now you're engaged in society and they're having kids, what do you think their attitude is going to be? How's like
I
what's the
mean, my
future?
kids in particular probably aren't the average kids, just because I'm always like, well, let's go as a last ditch effort to the regular Western doctor. But I think that just by virtue of Instagram and TikTok, all the things that they bring to me at this point, and my son's who's in college, and he and all of his boys are doing, like, they're making their regenerative steak and they're eating organically, and it's this movement of that age group, at least in my son's case. Um, Maybe less so for my daughter, but certainly my son. I just think that looking ahead, this is going to have to be the norm in 20 years, or else they're just not going to have healthy kids and they're not going to be able to get pregnant. I mean, that's really the bottom line.
So if you were somebody at one of these companies at this point, how would you change the strategy? Or what would you, like, if you were at Corteva and saying, look, we need to think differently because this is what the consumers want.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why they're pushing so hard, because in my mind, there's very little place for any of those corporations moving forward once we get the farmers off of the chemical treadmill. Can they be innovating? Can they, for example, I was talking to some regenerative farmers who are really excited. They've cut way back in their inputs. The one thing that they can't seem to do is source seeds that haven't been dipped in neonics, because the whole seed market is, of course, owned by these chemical corporations with a few exceptions. Can these chemical companies bring back what they took? Can they have amazing seeds that aren't genetically modified? Can they bring back those native varieties? Can they be supportive in other ways? Can they get involved in technology? But it is true that they are I mean, in the case of Bayer, for example, I mean, I don't think they ever should have acquired Monsanto. I think that was a huge misstep. I mean, ridiculous acquisition. And so they can always double back and just ditch this and go back to pharmaceuticals, which is, I think, where they should play. But for the others, I mean, I think it's really a hard question. Can they get into other solutions? Can they get into the algae for the soil? I mean, there are those elements of it, but by and large, that ultimately just takes money from the farmer. The farmers, when the farmers plant their things, they're buying all these products. They get this measly payout from their subsidies for their commodity crops that they grew. They're squeeze. Their suicide rate is high. They have to take jobs off of the farm. I mean, the farmers are the huge losers. Can we make the farmers winners and let the chemical companies pay the price? I would say we can. I mean, the chemical companies are going to grab on tightly as long as they can, I'm sure.
And do you think consumers, so let's put it back on that side, is are consumers realizing and seeing the difference, or are consumers saying those two products, those two pieces of spinach, those bags, that one's 10 cents lighter, less thing, I buy that? Or what do you see happening at that level, the sort of price signal or
Yeah, the
quality
price
signal?
signaling of the quality. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with regenerative, because there's regenerative that we know and we love that is nutrient dense, and there's regenerative that maybe they planted one cover crop and now they're calling themselves regenerative. So that's its own thing of confusion for consumers that already is coming out, and being able to establish some sort of agreed upon definition on regenerative agriculture is going to be helpful, I think, for the consumer. Now, the grocery prices are super high right now, right? So, until we really get the regenerative farmers moving in a large scale way, they're going to need this price bump, and so that is the question. And I think that that's where it falls on people like me and you guys and anyone who has a voice in this movement to um, really be pushing for that extra 10 cents to go towards the farmer. That's really the public awareness piece for sure.
So I want to jump on this comment that somebody made. So there was, I guess, Billie Eilish made some vegan comments. And it was basically around farming, animal right, like this whole thing. Right. But Aaron, our friend Aaron, made a funny comment, which I can totally relate to because I'm the same. She said, reformed vegan here. Vegans should hang out with the regenerative farmers more, and they'll start to piece it all together. And which is funny, right? Especially given Molly and Ryland's story. I was also a vegan and a vegetarian for 8 years. Not vegan for 8 years, but was vegan for part of it.
Let's add to this because I don't think people know it. Ryland was the producer of Kiss the Ground, and Ryland and Molly ran Cafe Gratitude, which was sort of
Gracias Madre,
the leading vegetarian restaurant in the country. Vegan restaurant.
I worshipped that whole institution back in the day
for the country, and now they run a regenerative meat cattle operation in Bandera, Texas. So,
right, and it's because Molly's story is she figured out that in order to have really nutrient dense plants to serve in her restaurant, they needed animals to be part of the life cycle of the plants. That again, it goes back to the whole chemical thing. It goes back to evolution. Like evolution didn't have only plants on the earth, and so I do not want to take this down like a debate around vegan or whatever, but I want to go back to regen. It's just the origin story, right? Plus, that's always the fun. It's like some of the origin story here. But somebody responded back to Maurice. Maurice responded back to Aaron and said, haha, yes, everyone should hang with farmers, but definitely not regenerative farmers who aren't able or even willing to invest in defending the very few standards they are able to cobble together. Regenerative farms still use tons and tons of chemicals, and no one monitors it, no one. Be careful what you wish for. Organic is the only group to have a program and brand in place that protects the consumer. All the others are only worried about their profit margins. It's why we developed Organic Plus, Aaron. The plus part, Ellen, means that the consumer is protected with an organic base and that the farmers also use a supplemental process like permaculture, biodynamic, syntropic, or even regenerative to help rejuvenate and protect the earth. Not only is it brilliant, it's simple and affordable. I'm with you, Aaron, regarding food is medicine. And I'm reading that because that to me is like the divide we don't need. Like that's you were talking about confusion, Kelly. Like that gets confusing for people because it's like, wait, if you read that, you're like, oh, I can't buy regenerative, right? Most people don't even know what regenerative is. And then you read that and you're like, oh yes, I'm going to have to stick with organic. And it also is counterproductive to trying to get chemicals out.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because this is an ongoing argument within the movement, and I'm with you where people need to get on the same page. The organic people have been really hostile towards the regenerative camp, and I would say the other direction as well. And so, but in reality, we're all fighting for the same thing. A regenerative farmer, if they could get to a point where they don't have to spend any money on chemicals, how amazing is that? And then they get this big financial bump when they're selling it to the consumer. Of course they want that. And the truth of the matter is they can't immediately. And so what are we supposed to do? Just tell these farmers that aren't organic now, well, don't even bother trying. You're going to do these steps to hopefully improve your farm. But we're going to make sure you don't get any price bump for those marginal changes you're making. I mean, this is just crazy. And it used to be that the organic world, which I eat organically. I know lots of wonderful organic farmers, but they would have and they still do to a certain extent, have these transition programs. So let's get you organic, right? And it would take many years to do it. Now, all of a sudden, it's framed as regenerative. And it's like that whole idea has been lost. And Gabe Brown is one at Regenified that is always saying, I mean, this is a man who's dying of ALS. He does not like pesticides. He also knows in order to have large scale change, you have to meet the farmer where they are, how their practices are, and handhold them to get them to a place where they're not needing to use as many chemicals. So it's not really fair to blanket say that could there be greenwashing? Of course. But that isn't fair to say that of all regenerative farmers.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess it also brings me back to transparency and outcomes data. Because again, if we were measuring, if consumers had insight into, like, if you could find out what was used on the farm that you buy your food from, right? Just transparency.
That would be the best.
Right? I mean, like, there's a farm that does a lot of like farm to table stuff around here. And people are always like, oh, I won't name it, I got my produce from blank farm. And, we went up there as a family one night to a dinner to support, there's a local sourdough bread baker that I just adore. And he was doing a chef's dinner up there. And so we went and, I'm like, this isn't even like, this is conventional. I mean, it's a small fresh veg operation, but like they're spraying chemicals on stuff, and like, and I know that. And so it's sort of like, what if the standard, and I was the odd man out for my family. They were like, but it's a local farm. I'm like, yeah, it's a local farm and they're still spraying chemicals on it. Like I appreciate that I'm supporting local.
So this is a point that we make about System C is System C has got to be based on outcomes.
Right.
Measurable outcomes. And so Elon Musk spent 25 years figuring out how to build reusable rockets. There were people working for years before him to build reusable rockets. When you saw that rocket land back on the launcher,
crazy,
you knew it worked. So it took a while to get there. There were times that it failed, and I think that I will say that when I was at Boeing, we concentrated a lot on safety, a lot more than people think we did, because people we knew flew on these things. We flew on these things. Whatever. So there was that concentration, and you measure it by the outcomes are positive. I think that is the costs of the dog barking in the background. The costs.
We're still losing our mind right now.
Now we can run a test for $80 that measures toxins. We can Function Health is something where we can order our own blood tests. We've got AI to help us inform. I think that my general sense, if I think through how technology evolves, is I don't know that it's going to be organic, conventional, or regenerative. It is going to be healthy soil. It is going to be nutrient dense crops. And one thing that Dr. Joe said is that one of the reasons we have increased diabetes is because we don't process arsenic well. Our bodies were designed to protect us against toxins, because the volcano that blew up emitted arsenic and it got into the water. And he said the tomatoes we have today don't have the micronutrients that help our body shield ourselves from the arsenic. So these are complex systems that have where we've got a lot to discover. But I do hope that we're not going to get ourselves stuck into,
camps.
different captured
Ugh.
camps.
It's just awful.
No time. There's no time for it.
So okay, so let's not go down the let's stay positive, because that's how Kelly and I roll. So
we try our best.
Susie Sunshines, here we are, reporting for duty.
That's right.
So until you take us down on an issue, then maybe we're not so Susie Sunshine.
No, then we're not at all.
So let's play this out, like what it looks like. I feel like we have such a good example of what when we are talking about a future state, what that could look like here. So let's start with I'm making this up, but I'm a consumer and this is the future state. I go to the grocery store and it shows a score on the produce. It's 95 or whatever. And part of that scoring is how was it grown? And were chemicals applied? And was fertilized? I don't know. Like that piece of it.
I still go back to the fact that you show up at the store and you don't need to ask that question.
Because that's all that's in the store? Okay, fine. Okay, can we talk about the years in between?
That would be wonderful.
There's no, I know that this sounds a little...
Okay, can we just do the transition part? Like, so people... Because, like, I feel like that's just, like, I waved my magic wand and it's like I'm in utopia now.
I do want to make one statement. As somebody who's been an engineer and done complex things, like make a rocket reusable,
I'm not saying it can't happen.
A good engineer honestly sits there and says, what needs to be true on a first principle basis to get this? And they keep working their way through it. And so that doesn't help everybody, but I think it's not unreasonable to start there, that it's perfectly possible, and then back off and say, okay, 20 of the rockets are going to crash along the way, and we're not going to lose our mind, and that the EPA is going to worry that the rockets will crash and kill a shark, and now we have to do a rocket kill shark.
That's a funny story. Carter told me this story last night. Did you hear this story?
No, they really did.
Elon Musk, at some point, that somebody in charge, the FAA said, or EPA said, well, if one of your rockets takes off and breaks and crashes into the ocean, is it going to kill a shark? And so he had to do a study to figure out whether the rocket would kill the sharks. And so he said, can I get some analysis? I don't know much about sharks. Can you give me information about how many sharks are in the ocean? And they said, no, we won't give that to you because then you might go kill them.
What the heck?
And so he goes to a whole shark study and finally somehow concludes that they're not going to kill sharks. And they said, oh, we forgot to ask you about whales. So he then had to do a whale study. But
no.
Yeah.
No.
How do they suddenly care about that after they're poisoning all of us every day?
And in the ocean, all the runoff that's going in the ocean. No, but the best part was that Carter was telling me this story at 7:45 last night at the 8 o'clock at night in the kitchen. I'm on the phone with him and he's telling me this story. And my husband's just like, what are you people talking about? Sharks being killed and Elon Musk? I thought we were working on food as health and now we're talking about sharks dying. It was fantastic.
But back to your point, I think we should... Yes, there will be an incremental point. We should get to that incremental point coming back from where we're trying to get rather than going forward from where
I'm fine. Okay.
You're just setting the timeline. You're setting a baseline there. Assumption.
I'm just trying. Yes, thank you. And all I'm saying is, for a consumer that's on right now, we have a bunch of people watching and listening, and I think they're still here. Some people are still joining. They've stayed with us, and so for them, when we talk about externalities of pesticides and changing that so that it doesn't just get passed on to some other cost structure, that we move it back into alignment. To me, and we talk about it, the way to do that is through transparency and awareness of outcomes. Then if our food supply is going to become standard, that it is nutrient dense, that it is affordable and nutrient dense. It is local. It doesn't have a chemical load, right? those are things that
Like that.
have to be okay. I think there's a dog conundrum. We're gonna see him come back with like a his toy yesterday that Bristol has this, like, it looks like a Kermit the Frog to me from when I was a child, like, you know,
Oh,
Kermit.
cute.
My
Yeah.
dad used to have this like long green Kermit the Frog toy, and yesterday Carter was throwing this thing at Bristol, and I'm like, it looks like the Kermit the Frog that my dad had when I was a kid. It was like the most bizarre thing.
Oh.
So, anyways, but Bristol, unlike my 8.5 pound dog, Bristol is a massive German Shepherd.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah. So destroys said Kermit the Frog versus my dog would just be like, I don't know what you want me to do with that. It's the same size as me. But I mean, I think we have to go back to, so when we think about glyphosate being used and we think about pesticides and all of that no longer being used, then how do we show that to consumers, right? Like, how do we let consumers know the difference? Because if we think about it, I really believe that people would pay, to the extent that they can, they would pay just slightly more. Even
I think so too.
Right. Even like, because Sherry Fry and Nielsen has given us data that, you know, even people that are on SNAP are making slightly better, like they are using a little bit more of their SNAP dollars to buy what they know to be safer, or like red food dye. Once that became a thing, all of a sudden the red food dye food sales went away. Not went away, but dropped dramatically. I think that's part of this, is like, do we tell people, okay, that has pesticide in it? Like, I'm just trying to sort out, how does this look as we transition along, Carter, to the future state?
And in terms of what are the handheld devices that we're going to be able to bring into the grocery store that I've been waiting on for, 5 years. People are innovating.
Going to have that for us?
Well, I think you can get a Brix. I ordered one. I don't know why I don't have it. I think you can get a Brix device for like $90.
Dan said that. Dan Kittredge said that.
Yeah, Dan Kittredge. But I saw one. I saw one advertised. So you're. I do not know the answer to your question, but it's not that far off. But now, the thing I think people should consider in this entire conversation is, we're moving to an exponential mode of the consumer being empowered to understand more about their health.
Yes.
And so the idea of using rent-seeking and power is crumbling, and we're now moving into a moment of disruption. I think that at the same time, we have an opportunity where agriculture is under threat. Conventional agriculture is under threat from what's really Brazil and other countries adopting all of our practices. So everything that America has put together over the last 70 years to advance agriculture, and the positives and the negatives, is now widely being adopted. And in many ways, our responsibility at this point is to say, we had a food system focused on yield. How do we make a food system that's globally scalable and good, that eliminates the need for healthcare and that supports longevity? And the cool thing is all of a sudden we now will be able to equip humans with more tests, and we'll be able to put that in the data sets, and we will be able to understand the diversity of that information, and we'll be able to explore, why is it that Kelly responds to this particular antibiotic in the bread system and I don't? And then once we start doing that, and that's what, honestly, that's what companies will need to do and should do and have always done. They've always they may not have really realized the full scope of what they should pay attention to, but they're going to be able to pay attention to a lot more. And it's, I'll say, at least from the engineering world of things, it's not that hard. I mean, we know how to do it.
With that beautiful statement, I unfortunately have to leave you guys.
I know.
Thank you.
And I think the dog doesn't mind that, because
I know we may be going. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, guys. Talk to you
Bye.
soon.
Did the dog suddenly stop barking?
The dog is excited about something, and we had chirping in the background where I don't know. So our sound quality here has not helped. But are there any other comments on the thread?
I don't know. I'm not seeing any comments. Lots and lots of people here, but no comments. Does anybody have any comments or questions around this?
The main thing I just want to reemphasize on this point is I know conventional farmers that are very upset about the shift. There's a lot of question as to whether the Senate will sustain it. And you can focus on that, or you can sort of say, the goal, the reusable rocket for us is when you walk into a grocery store, it's not a tough decision. Pretty much anything you can buy is good for you. Or if you've got some sensitivities, it's rapidly and quickly aware for you, so that there's not like, I got to pull an app out and I got to study this, and that's where we're trying to get to. And it's gonna take some time to get there, but that's what we expect. And when we have that, we won't have the healthcare costs of chronic disease. That'll be gone, and the money that we used to spend on chronic disease will show back up in a more productive way in the food system. And that's, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
I'm getting much longer. So I think we're bringing this to an end, Ellen.
Are we? I think we're gonna shut it down.
Yeah, Bristol definitely wants it to stop. Bristol absolutely wants it to stop, and we're gonna have to need a new recording studio because the dog care facility here is not working well today.
My family would probably be happy because it means that I might actually be able to wrangle something together for dinner tonight. Well, I thought I wasn't going to be able to.
Very
All right.
good.
Another episode of Food is Health with Ellen Brown. Carter Williams.
Wait, I'm sorry. What is Bolton going to make dinner?
I don't think tonight he is going to make dinner. That would be amazing if he was.
Okay.
He's overdue. Well, no, I will close it out for everybody with this. We will talk about this next week. My children, my 21-year-old daughter and my 17-year-old son, who are both amazing chefs now that learned on their own. I just gave pointers when asked. They are going to have a pad thai cook-off on Saturday night.
What about Mother's Day? Are you cooking on Mother's Day?
That was my only ask, not to cook. I was requested what I wanted for Mother's Day, and I said I just don't have to cook.
Okay, very good.
All right, and you have a birthday, so there you go.
Yeah.
All right. Food is Health Live. No, just Food is Health. Food is Health Revolution.
Closing
out.
Yes.
Ellen and Carter. Okay, bye.